What would you do if a millionaire mocked a humble waitress, only to be stunned seconds later by what she revealed about his own son? And how could one small moment in a quiet home turn a cold father into someone capable of real love? Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me, from which country and at what time are you watching this story? The late autumn sun drifted low over Asheville, brushing the ridgelines of the Blue Ridge Mountains with honey gold light as the dinner crowd began to settle into the town's familiar routines. On the front porch of Maple Street Diner, the wooden sign creaked softly in the breeze, a sound locals knew as well as the evening church bell down on Cumberland Avenue. Inside, the warm glow of pendant lamps reflected off chrome coffee makers and polished counters that smelled faintly of vanilla, old stories, and black coffee brewed slow the way older folks liked it. Elara Rowan moved between the tables with the quiet grace of someone who'd long learned to make herself small in the world, never a burden, always useful. She carried 2 plates in one hand, a pot of fresh coffee in the other, and wore that small, polite smile locals recognized even if they didn't yet know her name. She had arrived in Asheville only 3 months earlier, but something in her gentle voice and steady presence made her feel like she belonged to this town longer than that. The night breeze pressed lightly against the diner windows, scattering red maple leaves across the sidewalk. Elara paused near the big front window to adjust her apron and catch her breath. Her younger brother, Evan, was still at Mission Hospital across town. The bills stacked higher each week, but she had learned to carry worry the same way she carried plates balanced, hidden, close to the chest. Folks said she had a way of listening that made them feel understood. Maybe it was because she had known silence more intimately than most. Just as she reached for another stack of menus, the bell above the diner door chimed sharply. The room shifted, just slightly, the way it does when someone important or intimidating enters a place where they don't quite belong. Adrian Lockridge stepped through the doorway, brushing cold air from his shoulders as he crossed the threshold. People knew the Lockridge name in Asheville. Old money, old estate, old roots that went deeper in these mountains than some of the oak trees. But Adrian's presence felt colder than the wind outside, like a man who carried winter inside his chest. He scanned the diner as though he expected someone to rise and greet him, though no such person existed. A few patrons murmured polite hellos. Most simply stared. Elara did what she always did. She welcomed him with a nod and an open expression, even if his didn't return the gesture. His son, Micah, walked in behind him, a small boy of about 6, bundled in a blue knit sweater with sleeves too long for his arms. His eyes carried a quiet weight, the sort Elara had only ever seen in children who'd learned to shrink themselves to fit the shape of their world. He stayed close to his father, but not quite within reach, like someone used to being near, yet not held. Adrian chose a booth at the back, the one beneath the framed photograph of Asheville's Fall Festival from 20 years ago. Elara approached them slowly, careful not to overwhelm the child. She could read children's unease the way some folks read weather patterns. Micah flinched when a tray clattered in the kitchen. He pressed his palms to his ears, shoulders tightening. Adrian didn't seem to notice. He was busy checking his phone, frowning at messages that looked as heavy as the silence between him and his boy. "Good evening," Elara said, her voice soft as the autumn wind outside. "Coffee for you, sir? And maybe some cocoa for your son?" Micah's eyes flickered up to her just a second, but enough for her to see something raw and exhausted behind them. A quiet plea. Adrian didn't look up. "He doesn't understand," he murmured. "Just bring the cocoa, Em." Elara nodded. She didn't argue. But as she walked back toward the counter, she glanced again at the child, noticing the way he leaned away from the noise of the diner, the way he watched people's lips as they spoke rather than their eyes. She had seen these signs before. She lived with them every day at Evan's bedside. Outside, the sky dimmed into deep blue. Leaves rustled along the pavement like whispers. The diner lights cast a warm pool of safety on the street, a small refuge from the colder world beyond. And yet, even from across the room, Elara sensed that the cold Adrian carried wasn't born from cruelty. It was born from something older, quieter, and far more painful. Just as she turned back with their drinks, she noticed Micah staring again, not at the menu, not at his father, but at her, as though he recognized something familiar. A softness he had been missing, The cocoa steamed gently as Elara set the mug before Micah, watching how the rising warmth softened the tightness in his small shoulders. He didn't reach for it right away. He only observed, cautious, as though waiting to see if the moment might disappear. Adrian still scrolled through his messages, jaw set in a line that suggested this stop at the diner wasn't part of his plans, only an inconvenient detour in a long day. "Take your time," Elara murmured to the boy, her voice carrying the easy calm of someone who knew how to offer space without making it feel like distance. Micah slid a fingertip along the side of the mug, testing the heat the way children do when they're trying to understand the world through touch instead of words. When another burst of dishes clattered from the kitchen, he winced again. This time, Elara subtly stepped between him and the source of the noise, creating a gentle shield without drawing attention to herself. His eyes lifted, grateful but unsure how to show it. Adrian finally looked up, noticing the interaction. Something unreadable flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or something softer he wasn't ready to acknowledge. But just as quickly as it appeared, he tucked it away again behind the cool, formal mask he wore, like armor. "Everything all right here?" Elara asked quietly. "He's sensitive to noise," Adrian said, a little too quickly. "It's just how he is." Elara nodded, though her thoughts didn't echo his certainty. She'd seen children sensitive to noise. She'd also seen children afraid of noise. And sometimes the difference said more about the adults around them than the children themselves. But she kept those reflections tucked deep, offering only a warm smile before moving to refill a coffee cup nearby. Behind her, she heard a faint tapping, a rhythm, hesitant and uneven. She turned and found Micah tapping the side of the mug with one finger. He wasn't playing. He was watching the vibrations ripple in the liquid. That soft movement reflected in his eyes with an intensity she recognized instantly. A child searching for sound by seeing it instead of hearing it. It tugged at her heart with a quiet ache. Later, when the dinner rush thinned and the jukebox began playing those slow, old Western ballads that made the older folks sway gently in their seats, Elara approached the booth again to check on them. Micah sat curled against the window now, tracing little foggy patterns on the glass with his breath. Adrian had finally put his phone down, elbows on the table, staring at his son with a mixture of longing and helplessness he didn't try to hide anymore. "He used to babble all the time," Adrian said suddenly, more to himself than to anyone else. "Years ago, before, everything." Elara paused, not prying, not pushing, just present, the way good listeners often are. Adrian straightened slightly, as if embarrassed to have said so much. "Sorry, you don't need to hear any of that." "It's all right," she replied softly. "Sometimes talking helps." "Oh." He studied her again, as though trying to understand how someone could speak so gently without expecting something in return. He cleared his throat and reached for the check. "We'll get going." But when he stood, Micah didn't move. The boy was staring at the door, his small body suddenly rigid. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying a sharper chill across the dimming street. The fluttering of fallen leaves scraped softly along the pavement. Something about the shifting sounds seemed to overwhelm him. Elara stepped closer, slowly crouching to his level. "Hey," she said, voice low and warm. "You're okay. It's just the wind." Micah's breathing steadied. He glanced toward her again, as if deciding whether he could trust her reassurance. His fingers brushed lightly against the edge of her apron, so quick she almost didn't feel it, but enough to show a child's silent instinct. Reach for comfort, then pull back before anyone notices. Adrian saw it, and for a moment, the cold winter he carried seemed to thaw around the edges. "Come on, buddy," he said, offering his hand. Micah didn't take it. Instead, he let Elara guide him to his feet with the softest touch at his elbow. It was nothing, barely a gesture, but it was the first thing he'd accepted all evening. As they stepped toward the exit, the bell above the door chimed again. The diner's warm light spilled onto the sidewalk, mingling with the deepening blue of the early evening. Adrian paused at the threshold, looking back at Elara with a conflicted expression, a man sensing that something important had just happened, though he couldn't yet name what it was. "Thank you," he said, the words stiff but sincere. She nodded. "Drive safe. It gets foggy near the ridge after dark." He hesitated a second longer, then guided Micah out into the night. The boy glanced over his shoulder at her just once, but long enough to let her know he recognized something in her that made him feel safe, even if he couldn't explain it. The wind rustled the last red leaves along Maple Street as the door closed behind them. And somewhere inside Elara's chest, past the tiredness, past the worry, past the long days at the diner, something small and bright stirred with a feeling she hadn't known in a long while. Hope. The next morning brought a soft mountain mist that rolled through Asheville like a gentle breath, settling over the rooftops and blurring the world into shades of blue and silver. At Maple Street Diner, the windows fogged lightly from the warmth inside, where the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls mingled with the steady hiss of the coffee maker. It was the kind of morning older folks loved, quiet, slow, almost tender. Elara wiped down the counter with a damp cloth, humming a tune she barely remembered hearing from her grandmother long before life got complicated. It was rare for her to feel a calm morning. Most days were split between long shifts at the diner and visits to Mission Hospital, where Evan waited with more patience than any child should be asked to have. Her phone buzzed on the shelf beneath the register. A message from the hospital, just the usual morning update, but even ordinary messages made her chest tighten for a moment. Evan had been a strong kid from the start, but illness had a way of shrinking even the bravest hearts. She tucked the phone away and steadied herself with a long inhale, exhale, then returned to arranging the cookie jars. The bell above the door chimed softly, and a familiar figure stepped in. Micah. He hovered at the entrance for a moment, small hands gripping the straps of his navy backpack. His eyes darted around the diner, like he was searching for something, or someone, with nervous anticipation. Behind him came Adrian. This time, the man didn't carry the icy detachment of the night before. He seemed worn, somehow, like the long drive home had left him with more questions than answers. His shoulders were less rigid, his steps slower, as though he wasn't sure he had the right to enter a place warmed by kindness he didn't quite know how to return. When he saw Elara, a subtle tension eased in his expression, though he would never admit why. "Good morning," Adrian said. His voice lacked its usual sharpness. "We were passing by. Thought we'd stop in." Elara nodded politely, though she could feel Micah's gaze fixed on her. Children often watched with their whole hearts, silently sorting the world into safe and not safe. And she knew exactly which one he was hoping she'd be. "You two can take any booth you like," she said gently. Micah tugged on his father's sleeve not to pull him away, but to guide him toward the booth they had sat in the night before. It warmed something inside her, a small sign of attachment, however fragile. They settled in. Adrian removed his coat, ruffling the boy's hair in an absent way that told Elara he'd only just remembered how to offer such gestures. She came over with 2 menus, though she already knew what they'd likely order. "The cocoa again?" she asked, tilting her head toward Micah. He nodded once, quick and shy. Adrian watched the exchange, and the slightest crease formed at the corner of his brow. Confusion, yes, but also curiosity. "You seem to have a way with him," he remarked quietly. "Kids just need time," she replied, her tone as warm as the morning Sunday. "And someone who listens." His gaze dropped at that, as though the words hit deeper than she intended. Elara didn't push. She simply walked back to the counter to prepare the cocoa. Behind her, Micah leaned forward on the table, eyes following her movements, every quiet step, every gentle gesture. For a child who rarely connected with his surroundings, he was suddenly very aware. As she returned with the mug, she noticed he wasn't just watching, he was studying, the way a child learns to read a person instead of a book. When she set the cocoa down, he tapped the rim lightly with 2 fingers, as if repeating their tiny ritual from the night before. Adrian saw it too. His breath caught not loud, but enough. "He doesn't usually," he started, then stopped. "He doesn't do that with anyone." Elara offered him an encouraging smile. Maybe he just recognizes kindness. The words settled quietly between them, a truth too sincere to brush away. A moment later, the door of the diner opened again, letting in a sharper gust of wind, and with it came a man in a crisp charcoal suit, Silas Vance. His presence carried a different kind of coldness than Adrian's, structured, deliberate, as if he measured every movement and every silence. He scanned the diner until his eyes landed on the back booth. Then he approached with an almost soundless stride. "Sir," Silas said, addressing Adrian but glancing sharply at Micah, "you didn't inform me you were leaving the estate this morning." Micah's small frame tensed immediately. His hands tightened around the warm mug. Elara felt the shift like a drop in temperature. children didn't always need words to announce fear. Sometimes, fear lived in the tightening of shoulders, the shrinking into oneself, the way breath quickened without sound. Silas noticed none of it. Or worse, chose not to. Adrian straightened, the shift in his posture subtle but noticeable. "I'm allowed to take my son out for breakfast," he replied, keeping his tone leveled. But there was a flicker of uncertainty, an echo of the man who'd been told for years what his child needed, even when the advice came from the wrong place. Silas clasped his hands behind his back. "Of course, sir. I'm only concerned about maintaining the therapeutic routine we established. Predictability is essential for a child like Micah." Micah flinched again at the sound of his name spoken so sharply. He leaned slightly toward Elara, almost imperceptibly, as though her quiet presence offered an anchor he didn't have anywhere else. Elara felt the shift immediately. She stepped a little closer, not enough to challenge Silas, but enough to reassure the frightened child. "He's doing okay," she said softly, directing the comment more to Micah than to anyone else. "You're safe here." And Silas turned his gaze on her then, and the scrutiny was cold enough to make the air feel thinner. "And who might you be?" Elara kept her voice steady. "Just someone nearby who wants him to feel comfortable." "I see," Silas replied, though the shape of his smile suggested he didn't appreciate interference. "Well, Mr. Lockridge, I have the documents for this week's assessments. We should be going." Adrian hesitated. That hesitation alone revealed more than words. He glanced at his son, at the untouched cocoa, at the little pattern Micah had drawn in the condensation on the window. Something human and fragile flickered across his expression like a memory of what he used to hope for before silence replaced laughter in his home. Micah's small hand tightened on the sleeve of his sweater. He wasn't looking at Silas. He wasn't looking at Adrian. He was looking at Elara. A look that said, "Please don't make me leave yet." And though he didn't speak it, couldn't speak it, the plea was unmistakable. "I think we'll finish our breakfast first," Adrian said, voice low but firm. Silas blinked once, surprised by the resistance. "Sir, with all due respect." "That will be all for now," Adrian cut in, the finality in his tone unmistakable. Silas swallowed his protest. "Very well, I'll wait outside." When he left, the tension in the air loosened, almost like a storm cloud drifting away from the diner window. Micah slowly exhaled, shoulders dropping a fraction. "You handled that well," Elara said quietly. Adrian rubbed at the corner of his brow, as though unsure whether the moment should be counted as a victory or a misstep. "I'm not sure what I'm doing anymore," he admitted. "Half the time I feel like I'm failing him. The other half, I don't even know what he needs." Elara's voice softened further. "Sometimes kids don't need perfection, just someone willing to try." The simplicity of the truth hit him hard. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he watched Micah draw another circle on the fogged glass. Slow, methodical, peaceful. "Would you mind if I ask something?" Elara ventured, careful not to overstep. Adrian nodded, though cautiously. "How long has he been like this?" Adrian stared at his son for a long moment. His voice, when it finally came, was quiet. "Since he was barely 1. The doctors said the loss of response was sudden. They tested everything. We tried therapies, specialists, you name it. Nothing changed. Eventually they told me not to expect progress." Elara absorbed every word, not just the facts but the grief behind them. "And you believe them?" she asked gently. "Not a challenge, just an invitation." "I didn't know what else to do," he confessed, voice nearly breaking beneath its own restraint. "I trusted the people who claimed to know better than I ever could." She didn't judge him. She only nodded, feeling the heaviness of a man who'd been walking in the dark for years, guided by experts who may have never bothered to look closely enough. Micah tapped the table twice, soft, rhythmic, deliberate. Elara recognized it instantly, a silent request for reassurance. She placed a hand on the table near his, offering the proximity he needed without assuming touch. The boy relaxed. Adrian watched, stunned. "How did you—" "Some kids speak in ways we don't always expect," she said. "But they're still speaking." He swallowed hard, eyes moistening in a way he tried to hide. For a moment, the diner felt still. The jukebox hummed an old Willie Nelson tune in the background. Someone laughed softly near the counter, and outside, the mist began to lift from the street. But inside their small booth, Something else was lifting too: fear, distance, maybe a little of the silence that had held father and son apart for so long. Elara turned to check on another table, giving them space. As she stepped away, Adrian watched her with a look caught somewhere between gratitude and bewilderment, as though he'd stumbled into a place he hadn't realized he'd been longing for. Micah followed her with his eyes until she disappeared behind the coffee station. And Adrian noticed. He noticed everything. He didn't know it yet, but this small morning, this cocoa, this booth, this gentle-faced waitress who listened more with her heart than her ears was the beginning of something neither of them could name. Not yet, but soon. The rain came early that afternoon, drifting over Asheville in a thin silver curtain that softened every shape it touched. From the wide porch of Maple Street Diner, the world looked quiet, gentler somehow, while inside, warm yellow lights glowed against the gray. Elara pushed open the swinging kitchen door with her hip, setting down a tray of sandwiches. It had been a steady day so far, the kind of day older regulars liked. Slow country music, steaming coffee, and the comfort of watching familiar faces pass through the door. But when the bell chimed, she knew instantly who it was. Micah stepped in first, damp sleeves stretched over his hands, eyes scanning the diner until they landed on her, just a soft, flickering moment, but full of recognition. Adrian followed, brushing rain from his coat. He looked tired, though less guarded than before, as if something had loosened inside him overnight. "Afternoon," Adrian said, attempting a polite nod. "We thought we'd dry off here." "You're welcome, anytime," Elara replied, and she meant it. Micah approached their usual booth without waiting for instruction. He placed both palms on the table, watching the faint tremble of the surface as the rain tapped the windows. Elara noticed how attuned he was to movement, how he read the world through its quiet vibrations. She brought him cocoa before he asked. The boy's lips curved into the smallest, shyest, almost smile. Adrian watched the exchange, swallowing a complicated blend of relief and uncertainty. "He barely reacts to anyone," he murmured. "But with you, it's like he can breathe." Elara didn't answer. She simply sat the napkin by the mug and offered Micah a gentle nod. He tapped the rim twice, soft, deliberate. She tapped back once. A tiny connection, but real. The door opened again. Silas. This time, he didn't speak immediately. He just scanned the room with that sharp, assessing gaze. When he saw Micah leaning comfortably toward Elara, his expression tightened just a hair, but enough to shift the air. He approached the booth with clipped footsteps. "Mr. Lockridge, we need to review the schedules for this week." Micah's shoulders stiffened. Adrian inhaled slowly. "We're staying for a while." Silas didn't back down. "Sir, this change in routine may—" "Silas," Adrian interrupted, his tone firmer than it had been in years. "I said we're staying." The diner fell into a hush. Outside, the rain beat softly against the glass, as if urging them to slow down, breathe, listen. Elara stepped closer, not intruding, just offering her presence like a warm porch light in the middle of a storm. Micah glanced up at her with wide, uncertain eyes, and she knew exactly what they were asking. Without words, without sound, just a look. Micah's gaze stayed fixed on Elara, as though she were the only steady thing in a room suddenly tilted. She crouched slightly, making herself smaller so he wouldn't feel overwhelmed. "You're okay," she whispered, her voice warm enough to soften the tension in his shoulders. "It's just a little rain, nothing loud here." The boy touched his fingertips to the wooden edge of the booth, tracing a shallow groove worn there by years of customers. Elara recognized it for what it was, a grounding gesture, the way some children sought the feel of something familiar to steady their breathing. Adrian watched, torn between gratitude and guilt. "I don't know how to help him," he confessed under his breath. "Every time I try, it feels like I make things worse." "You're here," Elara said gently. "Sometimes that's the part that matters most." The words settled into him like warm light on a cold morning. Maybe it wasn't advice. Maybe it was permission to stop expecting perfection from himself and start trying again. Silas exhaled sharply. "Mr. Lockridge, we can't allow emotional dependency to—" "Enough," Adrian said. Not loud, just final. Micah startled at Silas's voice but relaxed again when Elara gave him a reassuring nod. She didn't touch him, not yet, but she let her calm radiate toward him. a quiet promise. Rain drummed steadily against the diner windows, creating a soft curtain of sound. Inside that little booth, time moved slower, warmer. "Would you like to draw?" Elara asked. She slid a small stack of paper placemats toward him, along with a red crayon from a jar by the counter. It wasn't a big gesture, but it was something to hold on to, something to choose. Micah hesitated, then reached for the crayon, a small, deliberate motion that carried the weight of a beginning. His first lines were shaky, uneven circles, loops, a few strange shapes that only made sense to him. But each stroke was calmer, more certain than the last. When he paused, he nudged the placemat toward Elara, almost shyly. "For me?" she asked. He nodded. Barely, but he did. Adrian saw the gesture and drew in a sharp breath, one hand instinctively pressing against his chest. The moment hit him deeper than he expected. "He hasn't shared anything with anyone in years," he whispered. Elara smiled softly. "He's talking, just not with words." Outside, the rain softened into a gentler rhythm. The diner lights glowed warmer, like an old lamp left on for someone coming home late. Silas stood stiffly by the door, frustration threading through every line of his suit. He didn't understand what he was witnessing, or worse, didn't believe it mattered. But Adrian saw, and Micah felt, and Elara simply stayed. When the boy finished his drawing, he pushed it toward his father, too hesitant, but hopeful. Adrian's throat tightened. "Thank you, buddy," he said, voice thick with something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. The boy didn't smile. Not fully, but his eyes softened. A crack of light in a wall built over years. As they sat there, father, son, and the woman who seemed to understand what neither could say, something quiet and healing settled over the booth, like the first break in the clouds after a long storm. And though none of them knew it yet, this moment, this small, fragile thread of connection, was the beginning of everything that would come next. A sharp mountain wind swept through Asheville that evening, rattling porch chimes and pushing low clouds across the ridge. By the time Elara finished her shift, the air smelled of approaching rain and wood smoke drifting from chimneys along the hillside. She pulled her jacket tighter as she stepped outside, glancing toward the distant silhouette of Lockridge Manor perched above the town like a relic from another century. She hadn't expected to be called there again, not so soon. But Adrian's voice on the diner phone earlier had carried something she wasn't used to hearing from him. Uncertainty, tinged with quiet urgency. "Micah's having a difficult night. He asked for you." She couldn't forget the way his voice softened on those last words. Now, walking up the gravel path toward the manor's grand entrance, she felt the weight of the moment settle onto her shoulders. Not fear, just the delicate responsibility of stepping into someone else's fragile world. The front doors opened before she reached them. Adrian stood there, sleeves rolled, hair slightly disheveled, the stress of the evening etched into his face. "Thank you for coming," he said, stepping aside. "Is he okay?" "He's unsettled," Adrian admitted. "A storm's moving in. He reacts to low pressure changes. Or maybe he hesitated. Maybe he just needed you." Elara followed him inside. The manor felt different at night, less imposing, more hollow, as though its long corridors kept echoes of memories no one wanted to revisit. Portraits of Lockridge ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following silently as they walked. They found Micah sitting on the floor of his room, knees drawn close, hands pressed tightly over his ears. A faint rumble of distant thunder rolled through the mountains. He flinched at the vibration, not the sound. Elara knelt a few feet away, careful not to startle him. "Hey, Micah," she murmured. "It's just the sky stretching." He peeked at her through damp lashes, breath trembling. She didn't reach for him. Instead, she tapped the floor gently, with 2 fingers soft, steady. A rhythm he could feel more than hear. Tap, tap, pause, tap. His breathing slowed, the tightness in his shoulders easing. He slid a hand across the carpet until it rested close to hers. Not touching, just close. Adrian watched from the doorway, chest rising with a shaky exhale he hadn't meant to let slip. "He wouldn't let me near him," he whispered. "He's scared," Elara replied quietly. "Sometimes fear listens better to gentleness than to logic." She turned back to Micah, brushing a stray curl from his forehead without touching him. The boy leaned closer anyway, trusting her presence. Then something glimmered near his bed, a small metal object lying half hidden beneath the frame. Micah noticed it at the exact same moment she did. His eyes widened, filled with something more than fear. Something she couldn't read. "What is that?" Elara asked softly. Micah reached for it with trembling hands. A tiny cylindrical piece of metal, smooth, cold, out of place in a child's bedroom. And heavy with implication. Adrian stepped forward, brow furrowing. "Where did that come from?" Micah shook his head, tiny, frantic. Elara turned the object in her fingers, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Whatever this was, it didn't belong here, and Micah knew it. Adrian took the metal piece from Elara's hand, turning it slowly under the lamplight. It was no toy part, no piece of household hardware. Too smooth, too precise, too deliberately crafted to end up beneath a child's bed by accident. Micah's breath quickened again. He scooted backward until his shoulders pressed against the wall, eyes fixed on the object as if it were something dangerous, something familiar in the worst way. "Easy, buddy," Adrian murmured, crouching near him. But Micah turned his face away, refusing the comfort. Elara moved closer, lowering herself to the floor beside him. "You're safe," she whispered. "You did nothing wrong." "Oh." The boy blinked rapidly, as though trying to hold in tears. He pointed not to the object, but to his own ear, then shook his head in a tiny, anguished motion. Elara felt her chest tighten. "Adrian," she said softly, "may I see his hearing aids?" Adrian fetched the small case from the bedside drawer. Inside, the devices lay still and cold. She held the metal object beside one of them. Same shape, same contour, same engineering. Her stomach dropped. "This looks like a broken internal component," she said, keeping her voice calm for Micah's sake. "But this isn't the kind of piece that falls out on its own." Adrian's eyes sharpened. "Meaning what?" "Meaning someone removed it." A long, heavy silence swallowed the room. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating Micah's terrified face. He pressed his hands to his ears again, not because of the thunder, but because of the truth unraveling around him. Elara placed a steady hand near his knee, letting him feel the rhythm of her breathing. "Micah," she murmured, "did someone take this out? Did someone touch your hearing aid?" The boy didn't speak, but he didn't need to. He squeezed his eyes shut and nodded once. A small, broken nod that shook his entire frame. Adrian went pale. "Who?" His voice cracked. "Who did this to you?" But Micah only curled into himself, trembling. Elara leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's okay. You're brave. You're safe now." A larger rumble shivered through the house, the sound rolling over the mountains. Rain began to pound against the windows, wind pressing hard against the old manor walls. Micah flinched violently. Elara gathered her calm and extended it toward him like a warm blanket. "Let's move him somewhere quieter," she suggested. Adrian nodded, scooping his son gently into his arms. Micah didn't resist, but he didn't cling to him either. His trust was still fragile, held carefully between fear and the memory of someone mishandling him. They settled in the reading room down the hall, away from the storm's echo. The fireplace crackled faintly, offering a softer rhythm for Micah to sync his breathing with. Adrian stared at the metal piece in his hand, jaw tight, grief battling fury in his eyes. "Elara," he said, voice trembling, "how long do you think?" She didn't let him finish. "Longer than it should have been," she answered gently. "But we can fix this. We just need to understand what happened." Outside, the storm continued to build, wind rattling the shutters like a warning. Inside, the truth had already begun. Its own kind of storm, quiet, devastating, unavoidable. And no one in the manor would sleep easily tonight. The storm moved slowly across the Blue Ridge foothills, leaving the house wrapped in a lingering hush. By morning, the clouds hung low like damp wool, and the air smelled of rain-soaked pine. Adrian stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Elara pour warm oatmeal into a small bowl for Micah. Her movements were gentle, quiet enough not to startle him, steady enough to reassure. Micah sat at the corner of the farmhouse table, blanket around his shoulders, the metal piece lying between them wrapped in a napkin. He wasn't touching his food. His gaze stayed fixed on the window, as though something outside might reappear at any minute. Adrian slid into the seat across from him. "Morning, buddy," he said softly. "We're right here." Micah didn't answer, but his breathing was calmer than the night before. Elara placed the bowl in front of him with a tiny smile. "Just try a little. It's warm." He pushed the spoon once, then paused. Finally, he tasted a small bite. It was progress, fragile, but real. Adrian exhaled, shoulders easing for the first time in hours. Elara sat down beside the boy. "Micah," she said quietly, "when you're ready, I'd like to ask you something, but only when you feel safe." Micah's fingers tightened around the blanket. The sunlight through the kitchen window rested on his face, revealing faint shadows beneath his eyes. Elara continued in a slow rhythm, the way one speaks to calm a frightened animal. "The person who touched your hearing aid, do you remember them?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "Were they someone from town?" she asked. Micah shook his head. Adrian leaned in slightly. "Someone from here? From the house?" Micah didn't move for several seconds. Then he lifted one hand and made a tiny, trembling gesture pointing down the hallway toward the foyer. Elara exchanged a glance with Adrian, understanding passing between them like a quiet thread. Not an outsider. Someone who had been let in. Someone who moved freely through these rooms. Adrian steadied his voice. "Micah, did this happen more than once?" The boy's shoulders curled inward. He nodded. A heavy stillness fell over the kitchen. Even the old refrigerator seemed to hum more quietly, as if listening. Elara placed her hand gently on the table, close enough for Micah to see, but not feel trapped. "Thank you," she whispered. "That took courage." Micah swallowed hard and pointed again, this time drawing a small circle in the air, then tapping his chest twice. It wasn't a sign she recognized, but the motion carried a weight she didn't miss. "Adrian," she murmured. "I think he's saying the person was around him a lot. A caretaker. A helper. Someone expected to be kind." The thought chilled Adrian more than the storm outside. Before he could speak again, the sound of tires crunching over gravel echoed from the front drive. All three stiffened. Micah shrank into his chair as if the simple noise carried a memory. Elara rose first. "Stay with him," she whispered, already heading toward the hallway. Adrian reached for his son's hand but kept his voice steady. "You're safe here, Micah. No one's going to touch you again. Not ever." When Elara reached the window overlooking the porch, she froze. A sheriff's SUV sat at the end of the walkway, its engine still running. Deputy Rowan stepping out, hat pulled low against the damp morning air. Someone had come with questions that might tear open more than just a single truth. Deputy Rowan climbed the porch steps slowly, as if sensing the heaviness inside the house. Elara opened the door before he could knock. Her voice stayed calm, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the frame. "Morning, Deputy. Is everything all right?" Rowan nodded once. "Got a call after last night's power outage. Just checking on the folks up this road." He paused, reading the worry in her eyes. "Did something happen?" Elara stepped aside so he could enter, though she kept her voice low. "Adrian's with Micah. The boy had a rough night." Rowan took off his hat respectfully. "Mind if I speak with him?" Elara hesitated, then motioned toward the kitchen. They found Adrian sitting beside Micah, one protective hand resting near the boy but not touching him. The small metal fragment still lay wrapped in the napkin. Rowan crouched beside the table, keeping his tone gentle. "Micah, buddy, did something scare you last night?" Micah looked down. His hand moved hesitantly toward the napkin, then pulled back as if the memory burned. Rowan noticed. "May I see that?" Adrian unwrapped the napkin just enough for the deputy to glimpse the metal piece. Rowan's expression shifted quiet, serious. "This wasn't from a toy," he murmured. "And it sure wasn't an accident." Micah's breathing quickened. Elara slid a glass of water toward him, speaking softly. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe." Rowan straightened slowly, choosing each word with care. "Adrian, whoever did this wasn't trying to hurt him once. This looks like something placed deliberately." A silence followed, long, heavy. Adrian closed his eyes, steadying the storm building inside him. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost cracked. "Micah pointed down the foyer. Someone in this house had access to him." Rowan nodded. "I'll need a list of everyone who's been inside in the last few months. Workers, cleaners, delivery folks, anyone." Micah tugged on Elara's sleeve. She leaned close as he shaped a small, trembling gesture with his hands slow and deliberate. She recognized it this time. Familiar, she whispered. He's saying the person felt familiar. Rowan exhaled, long and troubled. All right, we'll take this one step at a time. Adrian rested a hand over Micah's, his voice steady, even as fear settled deeper into his bones. We're going to protect you, I promise. The deputy gave a final nod and returned to the porch, radio in hand. Elara watched his SUV disappear down the foggy road, a thread of dread tightening in her chest. Back inside, Micah looked at her, the faintest plea in his eyes. Whoever did this, Adrian murmured, glancing at the empty hallway, was close enough for him to trust. And with that quiet, unsettling truth, the house felt suddenly colder, as though the echo of a hidden betrayal still lingered in its walls. The fog lingered well into the afternoon, settling over Pine Hollow like a soft gray blanket. Inside Adrian's house, the quiet felt heavier than the weather. Elara brewed a fresh pot of tea, letting the steam rise slowly as though the warmth alone could steady the room. Micah sat on the living room couch, wrapped in a knitted throw, tracing the texture with his fingertips. Every so often, he glanced toward the doorway, half expecting someone he feared, half searching for reassurance. Adrian stepped in carrying a small box filled with old appointment letters, contact lists, and the names of everyone who had worked around the property. I gathered everything Deputy Rowan might need, he said, placing the box on the coffee table. But there's something that doesn't sit right. Elara looked up. What is it? He hesitated. Most of these names are folks we hired through agencies, seasonal help. They come and go. But Micah said the person felt familiar. That means someone who wasn't just passing through. Elara's gaze drifted thoughtfully toward the hallway. Someone he saw often. Someone who blended in. Adrian nodded. And someone I trusted enough to let near my son. The words seemed to echo across the wooden floor. Micah shifted, hugging the blanket tighter. Elara moved closer, lowering herself gently beside him. Sweetheart, she whispered. You're doing so well. We just need to understand a little more. Only what you can handle. And they're wrong. He looked toward her quietly. Then he pointed to the ceiling, not high, but at the angle of a landing. Adrian frowned, piecing it together. The upstairs hallway? He asked. Micah nodded. Elara's voice softened. Did this person come from upstairs? Or go there often? Micah drew a small zigzag in the air. Elara recognized the shape she'd seen cleaning staff push carts in that path. The realization tightened something in her chest. Adrian, she murmured. He's talking about someone who moved through the house regularly. Not a guest. Not a passing visitor. Adrian ran a hand through his hair. That narrows it, but not enough. Before he could continue, Micah reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a small, torn scrap of cloth. It was faded, frayed at the edge, but unmistakably part of a uniform sleeve. When did you find that? Elara asked softly. Micah hesitated, then pointed toward the upstairs landing again. Adrian picked up the scrap, turning it in the afternoon light. It wasn't from Elara's uniform. And it wasn't from his. That pattern, he whispered, remembering. Only one person wore that color here. Elara looked at him. Who? But Adrian didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the cloth, his silence thick with realization, regret, and something deeper. Micah watched them both, small shoulders tight, waiting to know if the fear he carried finally had a face. And in that long, suspended moment, the house seemed to hold its breath. Adrian finally sat down, the small scrap of fabric resting in his palm. The color, an odd muted olive, brought back a memory he wished he'd paid more attention to. He spoke quietly, almost as if admitting it out loud made it heavier. Only one person wore this. Evan Klein, the maintenance worker. He came here twice a week, sometimes more. Elara felt the room cool a little. Evan had always moved quietly through the hallways, polite, almost invisible. The kind of presence a busy household would overlook. Micah, she whispered, turning toward the boy. Is that who you remember? The child looked down, then gave a tiny nod, slow, reluctant, but certain. Adrian closed his eyes. All those mornings when Evan had walked past him with a toolbox. The way Micah had shrunk, whenever footsteps echoed on the stairs. Signs he had mistaken for sensitivity or mood. Elara rested a hand near Micah, not touching, simply offering warmth. You did the right thing, telling us. Micah lifted his eyes just long enough for her to see the fear soften. Adrian stood, steadying himself. "I'm calling Rowan. We're not waiting." He stepped into the hallway with his phone, speaking in low tones. Elara stayed with Micah, quietly humming the tune she used the night before, an old hymn her grandmother used to sing on foggy mornings just like this one. When Adrian returned, he looked calmer, though worry lingered at the edges of his voice. "Rowan's starting a formal search. Evan's been off his work schedule for a week. No one seems to know why." Elara exhaled slowly. "So he left before last night?" "Oh, maybe," Adrian murmured. "Or maybe he didn't leave far." Micah's hand curled into the blanket again, but he leaned just slightly toward Elara, seeking safety, trusting the quiet space she created around him. Adrian noticed, and for the first time, he didn't feel the sting of guilt-only determination. "We'll find the truth," he said softly, "no matter how long it takes." Outside, the fog began lifting from the trees, one thin ribbon at a time, as though the day was trying to show them a path forward. By the next morning, Pine Hollow had shaken off the last of the fog. Sunlight settled over the maple trees like a slow promise, and the air carried the faint scent of wood smoke from distant chimneys. Inside the house, the atmosphere remained quiet but steadier, like a family taking careful steps after a long night. Elara set out a small breakfast on the kitchen counter. Micah picked at a slice of toast, his eyes drifting to the window every few minutes. Adrian tried to act casual, but she could feel the weight in him, an ache shaped by years of missing clues he wished he'd seen sooner. A soft chime from Adrian's phone broke the silence. He glanced at the screen, sighed, and turned it face down again. "Elara," he said, "there's something I've been avoiding, and Rowan says we can't anymore." She studied him, sensing the shift. "Maintenance logs," he continued. "Evan had access to the house far more often than I realized. He wasn't just here on scheduled days. Sometimes he checked pipes, wiring, security panels, even when we didn't request it. That would put him near the upstairs hallway," she murmured. "And near Micah," Adrian added quietly. Micah stiffened at the sound of the name, gripping the edge of the table. Elara scooted her chair slightly closer, not touching him, just reminding him she was there. Adrian leaned forward. "Rowan wants us to walk the house. All of it. He thinks Micah might point out other places where he felt unsafe." Elara nodded slowly. "We go at his pace. No rushing, no pressure." Adrian managed a small, grateful smile. "I know." When they stood to begin, Micah hesitated, eyes flicking toward the staircase, as though the wooden steps held memories he couldn't name aloud. Elara knelt beside him, her voice almost a whisper. "You won't be alone, sweetheart. We're just walking. You choose how far." Micah swallowed, then placed his hand in hers, a quiet act of trust that softened the entire room. They moved together down the hallway, the old floorboards creaking underfoot. Sunlight from tall windows stretched across the walls, turning the dust into soft gold. When they reached the base of the stairs, Micah paused again. Adrian approached carefully. "If you want to stop, we stop." Micah didn't stop. He lifted his free hand and pointed up toward the landing where the hallway bent out of sight. Elara exchanged a look with Adrian. No words were needed. Halfway up, Micah slowed, then tugged lightly on Elara's sleeve. He pointed toward a narrow door near the guest room, a storage room most people overlooked. Adrian frowned. "We rarely use that closet." Micah shook his head softly. Then he traced a small square in the air, as though drawing the outline of something hidden behind a wall. Elara's breath caught. "A panel," she whispered. "A service access panel." Adrian opened the door. The small closet was dim, lined with winter coats and old paint cans. And there, half concealed behind a hanging jacket, was a narrow rectangular panel with faint scratch marks near the latch. Elara's pulse quickened, not in fear, but in sorrow for everything the boy had carried alone. Micah pressed himself against her side, trembling. Adrian knelt by the panel, touching it gently. "Micah, was this where he cornered you?" Micah didn't speak. He simply lowered his head and nodded. A hush fell over the small space, the kind of silence that feels like it holds years of unspoken things. Adrian stayed crouched by the panel for a long moment, his hand resting lightly against the scratched metal. It wasn't anger that tightened his shoulders, it was grief, the quiet kind that comes from realizing a child had been frightened under his own roof without ever saying a word. Elara guided Micah a few steps back from the closet so he wouldn't have to face it directly. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You did the brave thing." Micah nodded faintly, clutching the edge of her sweater as though anchoring himself. The morning light from the hallway window settled on his hair, turning the small tremble in his shoulders into something painfully human, painfully honest. Adrian stood, closing the closet door with slow care, like sealing away a memory, not hiding it. "Rowan needs to see this," he said quietly. But his eyes never left Micah. "This helps him understand, and it helps us protect him." Downstairs, as Adrian made the call, Elara settled Micah onto the living room sofa. He curled toward her, exhaustion replacing fear. She hummed an old church tune, soft, steady, the kind older folks in Pine Hollow would hum while shelling peas on a porch swing. When Adrian returned, he looked calmer, almost purposeful. "Rowan's on his way," he said. "He wants to check the panel and take photos. He also asked something else, something that might help." Elara looked up. "What is it?" Adrian knelt beside Micah, choosing his words carefully. "He wants to know if there's anything at all, you remember hearing or seeing on the days you felt scared. A smell, a sound, a color, anything." Micah stared at his hands, working through the question. Then he lifted his head and pointed to the window, not outside, but toward the maple trees beyond. Elara frowned gently. "The trees?" Micah mimed the motion of leaves rustling, then tapped the side of his neck. Adrian understood first. Wind chimes. Evan always wore that old key ring with metal tags. They jingled. Micah's shoulders released a tiny bit of tension, as if grateful someone finally heard what he had been trying to say for so long. Adrian's voice softened. "Thank you, buddy. That helps more than you know." Micah leaned into Elara, and she wrapped an arm around him, careful not to overwhelm him. Adrian watched them, the weight of gratitude settling deeper into his chest. The house felt different now, not heavier, but clearer, as if truth had opened a window long kept shut. Outside, a car engine approached slowly from the gravel road, Deputy Rowan arriving, ready to take the next step. And for the first time, Micah didn't flinch at the sound. He simply held Elara's hand, trusting that whatever came next, he wouldn't be facing it alone. Deputy Rowan arrived just as the afternoon sun broke through the last stretch of clouds. His SUV rolled to a gentle stop, tires crunching over the gravel drive. Micah watched from the living room window, his small hand resting loosely in Elara's. He didn't hide this time. He only breathed a little faster, an honest fear, but no longer a silent one. Rowan stepped inside with his usual quiet respect, nodding to Adrian and lowering his voice when he saw Micah. "Afternoon, folks. I hear the little man helped us find something important." Adrian led him upstairs to the narrow storage closet. The access panel sat just as they'd left it, scratch marks catching the light. Rowan studied it, took photos, then crouched the way he had with Micah the day before, patient, unhurried. "This lines up with what we suspected," he said. "Someone used this spot more than once. And Evan, well, we've got reason to believe he skipped town." Elara felt Micah tense beside her. She moved a fraction closer, so her shoulder brushed his, a quiet promise that he wasn't alone. Rowan closed his notebook gently. "I'll put out a regional notice, but you all should know, none of this is Micah's fault. The boy did the right thing, finally pointing it out." Micah lifted his face just enough to meet Rowan's eyes. The deputy smiled softly, like a grandfather reassuring a scared child after a storm. Back downstairs, Rowan stepped onto the porch to make a call, leaving the family in a hush that felt strangely lighter. As the front door clicked shut behind him, Elara turned to Adrian. "You're quieter than usual." Adrian rubbed a hand along the back of his neck. "I keep thinking about all the times Micah was trying to tell me, and I thought it was just sensitivity." He paused, his voice softer. "I wasn't listening the way a father should." Elara shook her head gently. "You're listening now. That's what matters." "Nothing." Micah wandered toward the kitchen table and sat down with a crayon, sketching soft looping lines, shapes that shifted between trees, clouds, and something that looked like a familiar key ring. Elara watched him draw, her heart tightening with tenderness for the small, wounded boy who was slowly finding a language again. Adrian joined her, leaning lightly against the counter. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being the steady one when everything fell apart." "And I'm not steady," she murmured with a small smile. "I just refuse to let a child carry fear alone." Adrian looked at her, then really looked, seeing not just the caretaker who had stepped in during a crisis, but the woman whose presence had changed the rhythm of the house. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It felt like a porch swing slowly settling at dusk. Rowan returned a moment later with news. "The notice is out. We've contacted the counties north and west. We'll find him. Might take a bit, but we'll get there." Adrian nodded. "Whatever happens next, we're ready." Rowan gave Micah a warm wave before heading down the steps. The boy hesitated, then lifted his hand in a small wave back, tiny, brave. The house door closed softly behind the deputy, and the rooms fell into a still, peaceful quiet. Elara glanced toward the window where the late-day sun shone in gentle streaks across the hardwood floor. "Feels different today," she said. Adrian followed her gaze. "It feels like the beginning of something better." Micah looked up from his drawing and just barely smiled, and in that moment, the old house seemed to breathe again. The late afternoon light drifted lazily across the living room, warming the hardwood floor until it glowed like amber. The quiet inside the house no longer felt heavy. It felt lived in, like a place finally remembering how to be a home instead of a shelter with closed doors. Micah finished his drawing and held it carefully with both hands, walking toward Elara with shy pride. The paper trembled a little, but his smile, small and cautious, held steady. She bent down so their eyes leveled, and he placed the drawing into her palms. 3 figures stood at the center of the page, one tall, broad-shouldered, one small with tousled hair, and one drawn with soft curves, a gentle outline, a little taller than the child, but not by much. All 3 were holding hands beneath 2 tall maple trees. Elara's voice warmed. "Oh, sweetheart, this is lovely!" Micah tapped the figure in the middle himself, then pointed at her with a tiny, deliberate gesture. Then he tapped the tallest figure and pointed toward the hallway where Adrian stood watching them. Elara's breath tightened in her chest. Micah hadn't used many spoken words yet, but this drawing, this simple, hopeful arrangement, said everything he couldn't. Adrian stepped closer. "Can I see?" he asked softly, as though speaking too loudly might break the fragile glow of the moment. Micah nodded, holding the picture out. Adrian crouched beside them, his voice almost a whisper. "That's us. The 3 of us." Elara smiled at the boy. "You did a beautiful job. These trees, they look just like the maples outside." Micah lifted his small hand and traced the colors with one careful finger, then pressed his palm over his heart. She understood instantly. The picture wasn't just something he liked. It was something he felt. Adrian's expression shifted the kind of shift that comes when a man sees the truth of a moment too pure to ignore. He swallowed, then spoke quietly to Elara. "You've given Micah something I didn't know how to give him. Safety and a sense of belonging." She shook her head gently. "No, you gave him the home. You opened the door. I just helped him sit still inside it." Sometimes," Adrian murmured. "That's the part I'm worst at." Elara let out a soft laugh, the first easy laugh she'd had in days. "Well, then we balance each other out." Micah tugged on Elara's sleeve and pointed again at the drawing. This time, he placed Adrian's hand and Elara's hand together, his little finger tapping both, as if insisting the connection mattered. The gesture was innocent, childlike, and devastatingly tender. Elara's cheeks warmed. "You little matchmaker," she whispered, ruffling his hair. Micah leaned into her, smiling for real this time. Adrian watched, the weight in his chest loosening with each second. The quiet connection between the 3 of them felt like a porch swing settling into its rhythm at dusk, steady, comforting, honest. A soft breeze drifted through an open kitchen window, carrying the distant chime of someone's wind bells down the road. Instead of shrinking away, Micah tilted his head, listening. The sound no longer made him flinch. Elara walked over and rested her hands on the window frame. The cool air touched her cheeks, and she looked out toward the maple trees whispering in the wind. "Feels like the house is breathing again," she said. Adrian stood beside her. "Feels like we are." They stepped onto the porch together, Micah padding along in his socks. The porch swing creaked under their combined weight, a familiar, old sound, like stories shared on warm summer nights. Adrian wrapped the soft blanket around Micah's shoulders, and the boy nestled himself between them, leaning his head against Elara's arm. They rocked back and forth, slow and steady. No speeches, no promises forced out of fear, just a quiet sense that something broken was finally stitching back together. Fireflies flickered in the yard, rising like tiny lanterns from the grass as the sky shifted into soft shades of peach and lavender. Pine Hollow had always known how to end its days gently. Tonight, it seemed to save its gentleness just for them. After a long moment, Elara spoke softly. "What happens now?" Adrian gave her a look that held gratitude, humility, and a kind of new, trembling hope. He brushed a tear from Micah's temple with a thumb as he answered, "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Micah stirred, half asleep, and wrapped his small arms around both of them at once, one around Elara's waist, one around Adrian's. The quiet porch seemed to glow a little brighter as he settled into the safety between them. And in the fading light of that soft mountain evening, their small, imperfect family finally felt real fragile, yes, but held together by something far stronger than fear. Something like love. Something like home. As the sun slipped behind the Blue Ridge Hills and the porch settled into its familiar evening creak, the small family inside that old house found something they hadn't felt in a long time: quiet belonging. After all the fear, the searching, and the whispered truths, what stayed was simple. A father learning to listen, a wounded child finding safety, and a woman whose kindness stitched the pieces back together. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive with thunder. It comes softly, the way a warm light falls across a kitchen table at dusk. And maybe that is what this story gently reminds us, that love is rarely loud and redemption rarely perfect. It's the steady presence, the warm meals shared, the porch swing conversations where no one rushes the moment. For many of us, especially in our later years, we know these rhythms by heart: the sound of a screen door closing, the comfort of an old casserole recipe, or the memory of rocking a scared grandchild until their breathing matched ours. Life teaches us that family is not just who we are born to, it's who chooses to stay when the night feels long. Here, the lesson shines clear. Love without conditions can redirect a life. Every soul, no matter how bruised, deserves a home where they are truly seen. And the quiet courage of kindness often outlasts wealth, titles, or the noise of the world. When we offer others a chance to begin again, we often find ourselves beginning again too. Like a lantern glowing softly in a window on a winter night, even a small act of care can guide someone through their darkest road. If this story touched you even just a little, leave 1 inch the comments. If you feel it could be better, or wish to share a suggestion, press 0. Your voice helps these stories grow. And before you go, take a moment to reflect, maybe over your evening tea or while watching the last bit of daylight fade from your porch, about the people in your own life who may need a gentle word, a patient ear, or simply the comfort of your presence. If this story warmed your heart, consider sharing it or subscribing to stay close to this small community we're building. Thank you for spending time here. May peace settle softly into your home tonight.